Chapter 2. Twilight's group materialized near the road outside Canterlot. It was dark, and the ponies looked around, momentarily confused, until Spike pointed a finger up at the sky. "Twilight, look!" Twilight followed Spike's request and looked up, gaping. "Oh, wow," she gasped. "This is incredible!" A huge mass of nearly black clouds hung heavily over Canterlot, and the few scattered rays of sun were further obscured by the swirling mass of beings flying above the castle town. Pegasi, griffins, huge birds, even a pair of enormous dragons filled the sky, some sweeping down towards the castle, and some away, flying up over the rim of the cloud mass for some unknown purpose. "Surely, Twilight, you must have been at Canterlot for the competition before. You must have seen this in years past." Reddy adjusted her saddlebags daintily as she spoke. "Though I will admit it's quite the sight." Twilight shook her head. "I've never seen it like this before. The Moonstone Cup is important, but it's usually a much lower key event than this. I wonder what's going on this year." "Guess we'll find out, Sugar Cube," Applejack said with a grin, as she began walking towards the road. "But we better get a move on, otherwise we ain't gonna find out much of nothing." There was a general chorus of agreement, and Spike jumped on Twilight's back as the ponies joined the procession of traffic towards the castle town. Normally, the area around Canterlot, beyond the drawbridge that led into the town proper, was quiet and pleasant. A green meadow surrounded by rolling hills, beautiful growth forests, and the cliff face into which Canterlot itself was actually built. Today, however, the familiar meadows were practically buried. An entire town had grown up overnight. A colorful sprawl of tents, covered wagons, yurts, and every other kind of portable housing blanketed the landscape in every direction. And in the center of it all, an orderly column of small groups filed across the drawbridge and through the gates into Canterlot itself, under an enormous banner reading, "Welcome Competitors." Applejack drew a long breath as the ponies stepped off the road to take in the sprawl. "Wish you had told me about this beforehand, Twi," she slowly drawled. "I'd have brought my apple cart." "I don't know why it's like this. The Moonstone Cup has never drawn a crowd like this." Twilight's already frazzled nerves were wearing her thin. Were all of these ponies going to be watching her compete? "I don't know what could possibly be happening this year to cause this kind of a draw." "You didn't hear?" A harsh, gravelly, but vaguely feminine voice spoke up from nearby. One of the griffins from a nearby camp had wandered over towards the ponies. She was tall, much taller than Gilda had been, and easily twice any of the ponies' height at the shoulder, with a smooth golden coat and black and tan feathers on her head and wings. "They say the bearer of the element of magic is coming this year." Spike opened his mouth to speak, and was tackled to the ground by Pinkie Pie, who was making entirely unsubtle silencing gestures. Twilight was giggling nervously, her eyelid twitching. "Oh, they do say that. Really?" "Yeah, Twilight Sparkle," the griffin went on, oblivious to Twilight's nervousness and Pinkie Pie's pinkiness. "She's an alicorn sorceress from Manhattan, purple, kind of like you." The large griffin leaned her head over and lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Rumor going around in this area is that she's actually another sister of Celestia and Luna, and the Manhattan story's just a cover. You really don't know about this?" Twilight shook her head slowly. No, I really don't. It's very interesting. Twilight's eyes twitched again. "It's very nice to meet you." "Oh." The griffin stood up straight, extending a talon so that it engulfed Twilight's whole head. "I'm Gianna. You?" Twilight giggled nervously, tail twitching as he extended his shaky hoof. I'm Twilight Sparkle. Hi." Gianna narrowed her eyes and spoke when no punchline appeared to be forthcoming. "What? Seriously?" "Yep. Twilight Sparkle, bearer of the element of magic, that's me." Twilight gestured vaguely in the direction of the other ponies. "They're my friends, and the other elements of harmony." Gianna looked at Twilight, then at Pinky, who was extracting her hoof from Spike's mouth, then over to the other ponies. Rainbow Dash was waving with a smug grin on her face. Applejack tipped her hat. Rarity was a tableau of sudden indifference. Fluttershy was not in evidence except for a small tuft of pink mane sticking out from behind Applejack's leg. Gianna looked again at the group, thought for a moment, and came to a decision. Whoa! Twilight teetered again, her head tilting at an odd angle, and she silently wished that she could trade places with Fluttershy. It's really something to meet you, Gianna said, a bit more breathlessly than earlier. Hey, if you haven't registered, you should probably get inside. Her voice chopped again. If you stay here, you're gonna get mobbed. You heard the lady, shouted Pinkie Pie as she grabbed Twilight's rear hoof and began dragging her away towards the castle. Gianna shook her head as she watched the group of ponies retreat towards the drawbridge, then turned and sauntered back towards the other griffins. Hey guys, you'll never believe who I just ran into. The group approached the Canterlot gates. Like each group ahead of them, they were stopped and challenged by the royal guards. Twilight produced the letter of invitation, which floated over one of the guards. Twilight Sparkle and 6 guests. The guard glanced over the letter, and the pikes were withdrawn. The group walked across the bridge and stepped into the bustling castle town of Canterlot. Canterlot's white and gold buildings normally shone in the sunlight, but were only slightly less incredible in the dingy overcast. Traffic in the streets was slightly heavier than usual, but with only the competitors and the competitors' guests invited into the town proper, it wasn't the same awesome crush that was seen outside. The white stone street led a short distance to a public square with a raised pedestal, which was normally adorned with a solid gold statue of Celestia. Today, the statue was missing, replaced with a large sign bearing a long list of competitors, starting times, and brackets, as well as a short program of events for the coming days. A number of unicorns and other creatures were clustered around, looking for their own names and chattering back and forth. As the group approached, little bits and snatches of conversation could be heard. Defeating Ursa Major? I think they'll really be here, Celestia's daughter? Twilight cringed, as it became more and more evident that she, or whatever bizarre creature her rumors had painted, was the topic of the town. She timidly looked for an opening in the crowd, where she'd be able to fit in, but a Fluttershy-worthy "pardon me" or two was not enough to cut through the animated throng. Rainbow Dash sighed and lofted up above the group, flying forward to look at the sign more closely. Rainbow! Twilight called to her friend worriedly. Rainbow Dash ignored the call, perusing the sign quickly. Hey Twilight, I found your name, she shouted above the noisy chatter. She then looked back at the sign, rereading something. Whoa, and look who else I found here! All conversations ceased. Twilight suddenly felt the pressure of Celestia only knew how many pairs of eyes on her. Pinky's pinky sense had nothing on Gianna's fortune-telling ability. It's her! Can I get your autograph? Not an alicorn, so how did Pretty Unicorn really defeat an Ursa? Fluttershy squealed and curled into a small ball as the mob descended on Twilight and her friends. Leaning up from this position on Twilight's back, Spike attempted the most threatening draconic snarls, but succeeded in only adding to the occasional, "Aw, he's so cute," to the general barrage. Rainbow hovered uselessly overhead as Applejack and Rarity closed in near to Twilight and the small pile of Fluttershy on the ground. Pinkie Pie vanished into the crowd and out of Twilight's view. Please, one at a time, one at a time! Twilight shouted, her eyes shut, horn glowing in preparation to make a quick escape, but it didn't seem to do any good or even slow the tide of yelling. Are you really from Manhattan? Obvious nepotism. How did you stop Nightmare Moon? Like stallions or— I brought help! I brought help! The last shout, Pinkie Pie's shrill voice, cut sharply through the din. The group mobbing Twilight began to pull back slightly, and the cacophony of voices dulled to a nervous murmur. Twilight opened her eyes slowly, and let the glow fade from her horn. On the opposite side of the now muted crowd, she saw Pinkie jumping up and down, and yelling next to the imposing, brilliant white form of Princess Celestia. Princess! Twilight said, smiling shakily. Oh, thank you so much! Celestia smiled and looked over to the group. The crowd that had been mobbing Twilight looked up in trepidation, while Twilight Sparkle and her friends carefully extracted themselves and walked over to the princess. "It's good to see you, Twilight," said Princess Celestia, amusement evident in her voice. "I'm glad you could make it, and I see," she spoke up, turning to face the mob, "that some of the other competitors and their guests have been introducing themselves." The group looked much less imposing when they were no longer pressing in on Twilight. 15 or 20 unicorns, a handful of griffins, and what appeared to be a washed and rather better dressed diamond dog made up the entire group. Most of the conversation had gone away, except for some vaguely dissatisfied sounding muttering. "I'm sure Twilight and her friends would be more than happy to answer any questions you may have," the princess continued. "But for now, I'm sure they would like to get registered and settled in before the opening ceremony. You should all do the same." The muttering reasserted itself momentarily, before the knot of ponies and others split off into groups and went away from the sign. Others, seeing that there was now room, began approaching the sign to find themselves, while Celestia led the 7 friends away from the square and towards the registration tent outside the great ballroom.